Hey everyone, my name is Ben Consoli, and this is a Go Creative Show short. And today we're talking all about the brand new Sony FX6. I cannot wait to share this episode with you guys because we talk about all the features and the things that you need to know about this camera and how it compares to its Sony brothers and sisters, the A7S III, the FX9, and the Sony Venice. So if you guys like this episode and you like our content, please, of course, subscribe to the channel and click the notification bell so you never miss an episode. So let's dive right in because there's so much to talk about with the Sony FX6. Hey guys, so I'm here with Samuel Faris, Digital Media Production Center Manager over at Sony, and Jordan Haro, Director, Cinematographer, and owner of Home Court Pictures. And we've got these guys on the show today because we are talking about the FX6, Sony's new camera, not just an announcement, it's an actual thing. We're looking at it right here. The FS6. Now, everybody out there knows that I am obsessed with Sony cameras because I'm constantly buying them, and I just got the A7S III. I have an FS5. My main cinematographer, Chris Lochran, uses an FS7 and probably going to a FX9. So I love it. But there's a lot of people out there that kind of have their affinity to Sony, to Canon, to Red, to this and that. This conversation is just about this camera. What is it good for? Who is it for? How does it compare to the others in the line? And we're going to dive deep into it, and I hope you guys get a ton out of it. I know I am looking forward to learning more about this one. So guys, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thanks,
man, for having us, man. Fan of the show.
Thank you. So first things first, I think when people started hearing about the FX6, the initial thought was, this is going to be an FX9 in a smaller package. How true is that?
I don't think it's true. I have an FX9 and I've been using them side by side, and I think this is a better camera in a lot of different respects, at least for, I think, the run and gun style of shooting that it's sort of angled for. I think that maybe the FX9 slightly has an edge for like little details of resolution and sort of like a bit more of like a robust, I don't even know. I've yet to like see that exclusively because I'd say that the features on this are just stand out louder, like the low light performance. Mm-hmm. It's ridiculous. It's so much stronger. I think it's comparable to an A7S III. I would say it's immensely more capable than the FX9 in low light. It's way smaller. You can literally, like, this is one hand.
That size looks, well, the size is like the FS5. I mean, that is what got me to be an FS5 user, was the size of it. And at the time, that variable ND, which the FS7 just did not have.
Yeah, I think the one thing with the FS5 that frustrated me when I had an FS7 that I just couldn't get on board with, it was a great camera ergonomically, but the lack of the 10-bit at 4K, and some of the low light just wasn't that impressive. And this, I mean, is just, if you were going to shoot a documentary or anything like with one hand, I mean, you could do this with this one camera.
Yeah.
I think too, another thing that I would say, I mean, there's so many specs and like,
we will get to the specs.
Right, we get to the specs. I would say, just as a filmmaker, this camera has like naturally made me more inspired to make stuff. It just, you don't have to think about as much. You don't have to do as much. Like the minutia of just like, oh, we gotta dial this and that in order just to shoot. This thing out of the box is just a tool that works really well. And I think that's really invigorating and really exciting.
I love that. Now, I want to get people familiar with who you guys are. So, Jordan, we're talking to you now. I had mentioned director, cinematographer. You own a production company, Home Court Pictures. So how much time have you spent with this FX6 so far?
Yeah, I've spent the past 2 weeks using it nearly daily. Myself and a camera operator, we've been sharing it while shooting in some pretty aggressive conditions of a lot of night shoots, covering a behind the scenes campaign of the making of a TV show. And it's all shot on location around Los Angeles. They actually shoot on the Venice for that show, which, by the way, this camera uses the same color profiles or whatever of the Cinetone, so that just matches nicely. But this thing has been like we have an FX9 too, and it's been getting a lot of the shots we just can't get on the FX9.
So you've had it for a couple weeks, and we have some sample footage that we'll be putting in the show as we go along. So you've had some experience with it. Now I want to go to you, Samuel. Now you're from Sony. So,
yes.
We expect you to talk glowingly about this camera.
Of course.
Exactly. But I think there is just so much cool stuff to talk about, and we're certainly going to get to that. But let's just introduce you to the audience so that they understand kind of who you are, where you're coming from, and where you guys are. Is this your home? Yeah. Where is this place?
It's kind of my second home. We're at the DMPC in Los Angeles, which is the Digital Media Production Center. And it's a place where you can come and try out our new Sony cameras and test out lenses, maybe do some pre-production workflow tests and stuff like that. And so it's kind of an all-in-one where you can actually take your footage shot on the camera and then go watch it on this huge 305-inch screen CLED wall that we have in our screening room, and then actually see, am I getting too much noise? How is my image looking? How's it going to look on the big screen? And it's really a great place and a resource for educating filmmakers, and also here for the testing of launching new products like we have here with the FX6. Jordan and I have been talking last few weeks about the FX6. I've also used it. Actually, before managing this place here in Los Angeles, I was product manager for Venice, FX6, FX9, and I've recently moved to manage this place in January. So I have a lot of history background of even way back from like the FS100s to like F3s and how those cameras came out into the market at the time that they did. So seeing a tool, as Jordan was mentioning, like the FX6, it's really a powerhouse tool for run and gun. I mean, of course, there are times when you need a bigger camera, and I've seen situations where, like, when I showed certain filmmakers who are ready to use an FX9, the FX6, they're like, no, I need a bigger, more robust camera on the shoulder, and this is the type of work I'm ready for. But like Jordan was saying, if you got to run around with one hand, I mean, there's really no better option to have than the FX6. And I shot a couple of behind the scenes stuff too last week, which Jordan so kindly loaned it to me for a few days, reloaned, right? It was like a reloan. And so we got to do some really cool stuff. And like he was mentioning, I had it in 12,800 ISO with ND filters shooting indoors, just because I didn't have full control of my lighting, and it was amazing. I'm sure the footage you guys are going to see will speak for itself. So
now both of you have mentioned so far this idea of run and gun, docu-style. Is that who this camera is for? Is it for the person that's going to be running and gunning and doing documentary style work?
Definitely. So the idea for the FX6 is to, as Jordan was mentioning, to match the color science of a Venice and the FX9 and be able to like match those three cameras in post. That the three of them are actually part of a new cinema line, and the FX6 is what actually solidified that cinema line. So we had Venice with Cinealta before. We have the FX9 as like kind of the little sister of the Venice, and then now we have the little sister of the FX9, and it really is a great camera to match all three and be able to work. So let's say budgets, for example, the perfect situation, I think, is where Jordan is working. I mean, he's got the Venice shooting the main show, the FX9 is shooting the behind the scenes, and even the show as well, right? I think in some of the shots, the FX9 comes in as a camera, and so it's interesting to have also the behind the scenes camera and the run and gun camera being of the same DNA, let's say, of all of the cameras. And the nice thing about Sony is that we build all the sensors in-house, we build the processing in-house, so everything is part of this, internal way of getting all of the images to look as natural and as beautiful as we see them in real life. So
making the claim that a camera at that price, which is what, like $6,000 or something for the body?
yeah.
Making a claim that that camera can match a Venice is a huge, huge claim. Jordan, have you found that to be true?
Yeah, it's, I mean, to be frank, I have not put it side by side against Venice footage to like truly say, yes, this is the way. What I have noticed is I've shot in S-Log and then in Cinetone, and the difference is really clear. Like, it's just a prettier image. And it is that same prettier image that I would associate with an FX9 of just like a little kind of like milkier contrast, just definitely just a more cinematic look. And I think that is pretty enticing at this price point, absolutely.
So you have yet to kind of put them side by side and do those really, pixel peeping comparisons.
I have been able to do that, though.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. So let's bring it back to Sam, because I feel like, this is probably something you really need to do and make sure that when you go out there to the market and say, this will match closely enough, it's not the exact same camera.
Obviously, yeah, and they're different sensors too. That's another thing. I mean, they're different sensors, different processors, and also different uses. So like the Venice is outputting a 16-bit XOCN as the RAW file, and that's recording internally on the AXSR R7 recorder, which is kind of a limitation for the FX9 and the FX6, because they do output that 16-bit signal, but there's nothing to capture that 16-bit signal. So everything you are capturing right now with the raw output is a 12-bit ProRes RAW. And that's one of the biggest differentiators. So like, Marvel comics, any of the feature films who are really wanting to work in CGI and need that 16-bit codec, then they're gonna have to go Venice. It's that. So that's why the Venice is more for like the feature film and also feature series types of usage. And then the FX9, also a run and gun camera, but has also been used in series now, and has also been used as a camera on sticks a lot of times. And then now outputting to that Atomos recorder allows us to get higher quality than the 10-bit internal recording. But now that 10-bit internal recording is also what is like the minimum for HDR, right? So you do have an HDR image right out of camera, and that's what the 10-bit allows. But when you do want to get up to that 16-bit, the Venice is really the only one that can do that.
I want to talk about the external recording on the FX6, because something that FX9, well, if you have an FX9, you have to get that expansion pack, the
Correct.
XDCA extension unit.
That's right.
In order to get the external RAW into something like a Shogun. But with the FS6, you don't need that expansion unit. That is a huge deal and a huge cost savings.
It is. It really is a huge cost savings. And that's something that, to keep the size small. And so the reason why the FX9, it's just a whole different camera for processing wise. So that back that you use on it, the XDCA FX9, is not just to output that RAW. It also does other broadcast style things. D-tap out, for example, to power up like a monitor. It's got wireless audio slot in, so you can slot in those like shoulder camera audio, as well as 2 dongles, so you can output signals to go to the cloud automatically. Let's say you're out shooting, news, you got 2 4Gs or in the future 5G dongles that are connected directly to that back, and then outputting the proxy or the full res file back to the station before the camera gets there. So it does have a lot of different features in addition to the raw output, but you're absolutely right. I mean, to have that raw output right out of camera, it does keep the size small, and also does give us the ability to keep our costs down if we do want to get that raw.
Yeah, and I think that's a good way of explaining the value of that extension kit or expansion kit, whatever the right terminology is, because there is a lot more to it and a lot more in it. But if you just simply need an external RAW. I mean, I was doing ProRes RAW with the FS5 and certainly now with the A7S III. So I'm not surprised that you don't need it. I think I was more surprised that you did need it. for the FX9. But that explains why. There's a lot more in there.
Exactly. Yeah. And the same situation with the FS7, right? Remember the FS7 Mark II could output the RAW, but you also needed the back, and then the FS5 didn't need it. So we kind of followed that same, history, right?
Jordan, have you done anything with external recording?
I have only done the external recording when I had an FS7 Mark I.
Yep.
And to be honest, as someone who makes documentaries in the field, I don't care.
Yep.
I like knowing that it exists. It's cool to think like, oh, if I was, say where we are right now in like a highly controlled studio, that I could whip that out and, we could make that happen. This is perfect.
Yeah.
I think 10-bit is great.
Yeah.
For documentary purposes, I just don't need all that other stuff. And on that note of just something that I think is great about this camera that is really a lot cooler, I think, than the FX9, is the media. Granted, this is the new, I forget the term.
CFast Express.
CFast Express card.
Are those the same cards that are in the A7S III?
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
Yes, they are.
However, the slots will take them and are backwards compatible with SD cards.
Yeah.
And I have a lot of SD cards.
Mm-hmm.
They're like kind of expensive, but not really when you compare them to the XD cards. Those XD cards are expensive. And if you lose one, it's a bad day.
Oh, yeah.
I've had SD cards go through the wash and it's all good. And like this thing, just to have that, I think is so much more flexible.
Mm-hmm.
I would say and I love the FX9. I love its capabilities for all these different, you can just kind of create a more ad hoc experience of a documentary camera. This thing is the don't think about it, almost maybe more of like a director's camera, where you can just be brainless in a way, and get incredible images that hold up to all these other cameras.
Is that the criteria for any camera purchase you get, Jordan? I need something where I can be brainless. That is exactly what I'm looking for. You mentioned these external or these media cards, the CFast Express, new. The first time I saw it is on the A7S III. Now it's in the FS6. If it does accept SD and CF Express, what is the benefits that you get? What are the benefits that you get for the CF Express? Are there certain settings that you can unlock with the CF Express?
Definitely. Yeah.
Yeah.
With slow motion especially.
Okay. Yeah. So tell me, because I think a lot of people are going to make the decision to go with SD cards just because of the cost. But
Sure.
what can you do with the CF Express cards that you cannot do with the SD cards in the FS6?
Primarily, it's being able to record 10-bit XAVC all intra for the 120p in 4K. So that's really what the main key factor there is. But if you're gonna do anything less than that, or if you're gonna even do XAVC long op at 120 4K, you can still use your now you do need to worry about there are charts that I recommend you guys all check out before making your purchases, because there are versions of every SD card. There's like a V90 and a V60, so you always got to pay attention. It's like, what are you going to shoot? The CFast Express just unlocks everything. It just basically gives you that confidence. It's similar to our black cards on the Venice. We have the black card that is much faster, 4.8 gigabits versus the 2.4 gigabits on the blue cards. And that gives us all of the slow motion options on the Venice at 6K all the way down to 4K. So another difference also between these cameras is that the FX6 is a 4K sensor. It's not a 6K sensor like the Venice or the FX9. So regarding resolution wise, you do get that extra resolution on those other two cameras.
Okay.
And then one thing that I do want to mention on the FX9 and the FX6 that I really did enjoy is having the ability to record the gyro metadata and then stabilize in post. Since they are running gun cameras, they have that feature built in so that you can, even if you have a shaky image in capture, it actually analyzes the metadata as opposed to analyzing the actual video itself, and makes it just so much quicker. I mean,
and I definitely want to talk about the stabilization, and I'm glad you brought that up. But just to kind of round the corner with the conversation about the cards. So
Sure.
the only thing that you need the CF Express cards for right now was the 120p 4K, or was there
Correct.
some? Okay,
120p 4K. Yeah.
there
And
is
all
one
intro.
all
You're
intro.
going all
There-
intro, yeah.
Now, there is one other benefit that I found is the ability to offload media was a lot faster on the
Oh,
CF
yeah.
Express cards. And honestly, that was the reason why I bought them. I bought those CF Express knowing I didn't really need them for the type of filming I'm doing, but that quick offload is so valuable to me, which is why I invested in the little SSD cards and anything I can to get media offloaded quickly. I've been investing in, and that was one thing. It's a significant speed difference.
Very significant. To that point, we had a situation this weekend where we were trying to offload from the actual card reader, but we didn't have the cable that came with the card reader. So we were just like, oh, we'll just use whatever USB-C cable to connect it. And when we did that, we got really slow connection. So make sure that you're using the cable that comes with the reader so that you do take advantage of those high speeds. Because if you're just using any old USB-C charger cable, for example, it's not going to give you that speed. So
All right.
make sure
Let's talk about the stabilization.
yes.
The A7S III has the ability to stabilize in camera. At least this is the way I'm understanding it. So certainly correct me if I'm wrong. The FS6 does not do the stabilization in camera, but it can record the metadata where you can do stabilization in post using Catalyst. Do I have my information right?
Yeah, actually, you can get the stabilization metadata on the A7S III as well as the FX6 and the FX9.
Okay.
Now, the difference is that the A7S has the IBIS, in-body stabilization on the sensor, which when you're using it on a gimbal, sometimes, it could interrupt, let's say, the stabilization from the gimbal.
Yes.
So that's why the FX6 actually is a superior camera for gimbals as opposed to the A7S. So then you having that metadata in post, and Catalyst is a free software, so you could just download it, stabilize, and then output whatever format you want. You can downgrade the format if you want, or keep it at the same resolution, same file format, and everything. So
And I have seen some incredible stabilization using
know.
it really
Yeah.
is like mind-blowing levels of stabilization,
Yep.
especially, and that also lends even more to the documentary filmmaker. Jordan, when you're running around handheld, you must have had this experience in your 2 weeks working with it. How good is that stabilization? How valuable is that for documentary filmmakers?
It's incredible to know it's there. To know it's there and to know that it exists, I think is awesome. I think for me, and I had an A7S1, A7S2 for years, and great cameras. And I held off on buying the 3 when I heard this was coming out. Not for any of the reasons, though, we're talking about. I feel like there's just this form factor has an intangible quality of, even though there's no in-body stabilization or no stabilization around the sensor, the way that it distributes weight, much like the way the FX9 is just, I don't know, there's more of a rectangular shape that just fits in your hand. You can hold it underneath if you want. There's this on the side, just like that FS5 style. You can just get a more stable image out of it. Whereas I found the A7, I would have to nearly use a monopod to prevent that sort of little quiver that you just, I don't know how to get rid of that thing otherwise. And it just always, unless it's completely on a tripod or monopod, it's always there. And for some reason that always bugged me a lot. And I just love the way that if there is gonna be a shake in this, it just feels a little more natural.
Yeah, I'm with you on. I haven't held the FS6 yet, but I can tell you just as an FS5 owner. Sorry, I have not held the FX6 yet, but as an FS5 owner, I love just the feel of that camera, the ergonomic. And it's crazy because everyone's like, the FS7, the FX9 have the ergonomics of a regular camera, like a more professional camera. But there's something about that body of the FS5 and now the FX6. It's just the perfect blend between a DSLR and a more like standard shoulder mount camera.
Yeah. I truly, like, I believe this is the perfect documentary camera. Like I think like, aside from brands or whatever, I just don't know of any camera, a digital camera that exists that truly has this in one package with all these features, and this easy to use.
I want to talk about the low light capabilities of the FX6. We mentioned it a little bit earlier in the show, and specifically, Jordan, for you as a documentary filmmaker, or at least working on a documentary now, how does it, well, not even how does it compare? Talk to me just about your experience in low light with this FX6.
It's crazy, the FX6 low light capability. I mean, I've sent you some footage that you'll see that was just in, like, there's the moon exposed, there's stars exposed, and shadows are there. And mid-tones as well. It's very, kind of, I don't know how it does it. It's very like spooky how crisp the image is out of it. I also think one thing, and again, I have not held the A7S III as much, but sometimes I feel like the A7S, and this may be just my own error as an operator, but I feel like when I would be dialing in the settings, it would be like, okay, yeah, you can see everything at night. Cool. And it'd be like, wait, but it's nighttime. Why is everything so bloomed? Certainly this can bloom in that way, but I think maybe just due to the, whether it's the ND or just all the options you have at your fingertips right here, you can really get a much more like clean, natural looking image that reads, it's nighttime, but you have an exposure, and it's not gonna be noisy either. And it just feels it feels like what your eye is seeing a little more. It's like true to your own vision.
That's something that I sort of didn't love about the A7S II, and I haven't played too much with the 3 in low light, but the low light was amazing, but that's not what nighttime looks like, And I think I know what you mean when you say it's more like the low light is more accurate to the way that your eye perceives night versus just a camera making night look brighter. I think there is a big difference there. But what is it attributed to though, Sam? Because is it a dual ISL or like what is it?
Yeah, so the way that the cameras for, let's say, the Alpha lineup, they don't manage the base ISO the way that, let's say, we do with the Venice or with the FX9. So they don't measure it the same way as the more professional cameras. And so it's really hard to compare, apples to oranges in that sense. But there is different processing that's happening in the FX6 that is allowing it to go on an 800 base and a 12,800 base. Whereas with the FX9, you have 800 and 4,000. With the Venice, you have 500 and 2,500. Now with the Venice, normally, you won't have somebody trying to capture a feature at that high of an ISO. I mean, mostly they would just think that high of an ISO is too much. And if you're coming from film, where it was like 500, 800, 1250 with the F55. So it's like going that high sometimes is not what filmmakers are looking for, let's say, at that level. But when they see it on a run and gun doc, it's what we need. I mean, we're not setting up all these lights here. You know what I mean? It's like running around, and you do need that extra low sensitivity. So you have to change the whole processing. So on, like, for example, with the Venice and the FX9, when you go into that base ISO and you take it into post on the raw, you can actually change the ISO in post. Whereas here, it's working more like a gain, but with a different type of processing. So it's not the actual two base switching that is happening on FX9 and
yeah, and certainly there's no false claims either. You're not calling it a dual native ISO. You call it high sensitivity mode.
Exactly.
And now, does it just begin at 12,800? Or like, is that it? Is that the high sensitivity mode, 12,800? Or can you go up from there?
No, you can go up from there, but 12,800 is the actual level. It's kind of like the sweet spot where we found best quality, best noise capabilities. It's kind of, that's where, but the actual base of the camera is the 800. So that's where you would be at, let's say, your 0 dB of gain if you were in the video world.
Yep. Now, it also has the electronic variable ND, which is a feature in the FS5 that I absolutely love. Oh, yeah. It's like once you use that, you really can't. Like once you have that, that's it. You can never have a camera without it. It's been around for a while. I know people are familiar with it, so I don't want to belabor it too much, but is there something new, different about this variable ND on the FX6? Or is it just what we expect and have grown to need?
Well, I mean, the auto ND and the variable ND actually came from the broadcast world on documentary and news cameras that were running gun. And so it trickled down to the FS5 then from the broadcast world, and then into the FS7 Mark II. Now, the FX9 is the first full-frame camera to have an auto variable ND filter in it. And so now the FX6 is the second camera to have a full-frame variable ND filter in it. So that really is the key feature, because when you can just change your iris, let's say, and then have your ND kick in, you're basically controlling your depth of field. So not only just going in and out of rooms, but like you can control your depth of field from, let's say, a 1.8 to like a 5.6, and then that ND will kick in as needed and allow you to do that, something that you can't do in any other camera, as to my knowledge.
Yeah, it's absolutely incredible.
Yeah.
So we're kind of getting near the end of our time here, but I want to talk about a few other odds and ends that are important that we haven't hit yet. Let's start with this S-Cinetone, which is, fairly new. I think the first time I heard about it was in the A7S III, or am I wrong? I may have these. You guys put out a lot of cameras. Sony puts out a lot of cameras, so I don't remember exactly when it first came out, but it's relatively new, and I want to hear more about it.
The idea was that it's similar to a LUT that's added onto the S-Log 3 to give you that same S709 look. And the S709 also came from customer feedback where the 709 was just too saturated, too contrasty, and then the S709 came out to be a little less contrasty, a little less saturated, and more cinematic look, and that's where S-Cinetone comes from. Of course, they're all different, but if you start with that same S-Log 3 base, like Jordan was saying, easy to match,
So the S-Cinetone is kind of like a LUT. So that's really not meant for someone that's going to go and then color that. This is sort of your...
Correct.
Okay. So have you played with that, Jordan, in your 2 weeks? I mean, that sounds like the perfect situation to get, a really good cinema quality look without having to grade.
Yeah. I, at first, was a little allergic to like baking and color.
Yes, it's scary to do that.
It's scary. But I'm doing it. I don't care, at least with what I'm doing right now. I think it just does look way better. I shot some stuff in S-Log 3, Cine, Gamut, whatever, in that flat look, and then tried to kind of throw some stuff on. And yeah, I mean, it's just a difference of like, we could spend a lot of time tinkering around, trying LUTs on, paying money to get it to a proper colorist, and that's all fine and well. And but I think there's just something that this Cinetone gives you right out, again, like that's the theme of this camera. Like out of the box, you're just able to like the same way you put your SD cards in. It just, at a lower barrier to entry, you're just getting much better results. I would say that image is something that like you would try to pay for with a colorist. It definitely has that look of just cleaner. Something in the highlights just seems more natural. You just don't get as much like overexposure in certain parts, but it also just doesn't feel processed. It feels natural, and yeah, cinematic, I'd say.
I'm hearing you say that a lot, this idea of natural. It looks natural, it looks natural. And
Yeah.
looking at the test footage, it really does. It really does. Like, it has such a naturalistic look to it. I mean, was that your goal? You know, Sam, like, was that Sony's goal to have a camera that just gives off this natural look right out of the box, like we keep hearing?
Yeah. So the idea really is skin tones, right? Some sensors don't do well with different skin tones, and the idea is to give a natural look as a starting point for all of your skin tones to look the way that they look to us, and not give it, a tinge of green or blue or red or anything like that, and then let the colorist decide or let the filmmaker decide where they want to go from there, And so that natural look is mostly to avoid the video look that we've been used to watching on TV, right? And mostly trying to avoid that 709 harsh, saturated look. And giving you that natural cinematic look is just the perfect starting point for all these cameras. And then, you guys can go and create the look that you want on a LUT or in post, or even on set with a, LUT live grade. So it's really up to you. That natural starting point is key.
Sam,
Yes.
what do people need to know about this camera? What are the specs that they need to know that you're hearing a lot of excitement about?
Yeah.
And just kind of in closing, what should they hear?
Well, first of all, great slow-mo camera. You could do 240 in HD and 120 in 4K, which you can't do on the FX9. FX9 takes you up to 180. But that is because it has a bigger sensor resolution, at 6K. So another thing is the Auto ND killer feature we talked about, being able to do there's actually a new flag button on there to let you know when the clips are okay. And that adds the metadata onto the clip. So they're saying, oh, that's a killer shot, let me flag that.
Nice.
It's right on the body of the camera. And then the ability to just do the autofocus. I mean, just having a full frame sensor, of course, if you're using full frame lenses, having that quick autofocus, and not only just an autofocus that we're saying like consumer style. This is a configurable user setting autofocus where you can choose speed, sensitivity, how you're gonna rack, and it's just so flexible to be able to work with those types of features on a shoot. It's just amazing.
I'm glad you mentioned autofocus. That I've had my A7S III for like two weeks now, and I just did my first shoot with it. And it is the first time I used a camera in autofocus professionally, like for real. Like I trusted it. I let it go. I was running two cameras at the same time, and you can't. As you know, you're running 3 right now. Yeah. You just can't pay attention to all of them. And I honestly, I was like nervous, thinking to myself, oh my God, I'm completely relying on autofocus right now.
Yeah.
But it was amazing. Jordan, in your 2 weeks with it, have you played with the autofocus at all? And what were your thoughts?
I leave the autofocus on all the time. It's crazy. Your words are mine. Like you're skeptical on the first maybe 2 shots with it. You're like, this can't be real. Something's gonna screw up, and it doesn't. It's awesome, and I think it's very similar to the FX9 as well. I've even noticed there's actual. The bottleneck can depend on what lens you're using.
Yeah.
I found some lenses are just slower and not as responsive as other ones. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's impressive to see. We actually shot a sit-down interview where this was a B cam, and there were only 2 of us, and I was asking the questions, getting the eye lines, so it was one operator, and he just left this on auto, and it tracked the whole time. I mean, granted, it was a sit-down interview, but it's still something I never would have done on any of the previous, or just any camera.
And I think that a lot of its success is that you can be so granular about your settings. You know, it's not just a matter of turning on autofocus and it is what it is. I mean, talk to us a little bit about the settings that you have access to in autofocus and kind of what the secret sauce is, how you got your autofocus to be so successful.
Well, one thing is that it's in the sensor. So it's not just on the lens. And like Jordan was mentioning, with some lenses, based on the motors that they have, that autofocus will kick in much faster. Primarily if you're using Sony E-mount lenses, right? Because we have a whole system on autofocus and the motors that we're using, the technology that we're using just to have that autofocus work together with the sensor of the camera. So the reason why we don't have autofocus in a Venice, first of all, is because usually you have a focus assist when you're using a Venice, and the sensor itself doesn't have the autofocus. So these two cameras have it. The A7S III has it, and like you said, it's not the autofocus where it's like fishing, and that's really what like always turned me off from autofocus. Is like if I'm shooting something and it's gonna fish during the shot, then everybody's gonna know I'm in autofocus, you know. But with this one, you don't know if there's a focus puller really pulling that focus for you, like so on point. And with a full frame sensor and full frame lenses, it's really like amazing how crisp and so it's a sensitivity on like when a person can walk in front of me, how fast can you move to that face, and also the speed of like a rack focus. If I move my camera and I'm panning and I want it to rack, I could choose that speed up to 7 different levels, from like 1 being the slowest, 7 being the fastest. So it really is, you know, now the job of the focus assist is to set up that autofocus for you.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, I mean, it really is becoming that way. Can you also register faces on the FS6 like you can the A7S III?
You definitely can. Yes.
Have you? It sounds like you played with that, Jordan. Talk to us about what that means and how it works.
To be honest, I don't know how it works. It just sees a face and it locks on it and tracks it. And like even right now, I'm holding this right here. Sam's over there. I'm seeing it. In fact, you can. I don't know if it's not going to be possible, but he's way over here in the dark.
Yeah.
And there's a little. Actually, yeah, it's popping up right there. There's a little square that's coming up over his face, and
that's just basic face. That's the face detection. But I'm saying where you can register a face. So like if you're doing a wedding or something, or there's a crowd, with the A7S III, you can tell the camera which face to focus on. Does it have a similar
definitely
feature?
Oh, that's new to me.
It does
that's
have
cool.
that feature. Yeah, you can
cool.
do face registration as well.
Yeah. So I think a lot of people, like there's so much more in the autofocus than you would think.
Yeah.
It goes way beyond. People hear autofocus, especially guys like my age and older, or even younger a little bit, you have an idea of what autofocus is. And this is not that anymore. The autofocus has changed. It's a real usable feature now. And I think you guys have done a good job in making that human feeling. Like it looks like a human being is focusing. It doesn't look like a machine is focusing.
Yeah, that's another thing. It's like if something does come in front of the person's face, like we tried to shoot it like behind grass, and it wasn't fishing for the focus on the grass, it's maintaining that face autofocus the whole time. And so that's something that we didn't see before in autofocus.
Yeah, the project I was doing, it was a woman named, well, her blog is called Broma Bakery. She has a foodtography school where she teaches food photography called Foodtography. And we had an overhead camera, and then I had the A7S on her, but I was bouncing around all over the place. It was a crew of one, and I was bouncing around making that all happen, and I just had to leave everything on autofocus. And it's like, she's walking around. I mean, she's cooking. She's food styling.
Yeah.
Even when her head was turned and there was no face to see, the camera just knew that was still her. It was really incredible. And I was able to shoot at like I was using E-mount lenses that were an f4. I was open the whole time. No problem at all. No matter where she was in the frame, this camera focused and followed and looked good, like it looked natural. It focused better than I would with my own hand. And it just looked really, really good. So that's something that really impresses me. Okay. We didn't touch audio at all. Is there anything to talk about? I know you have 4 channels of audio, but then you can also do the MI, through the MI shoe, that additional 2-channel adapter. Oh, I have one. I can't remember the name of it. You know what I'm talking about, Sam.
UWPD.
Yes.
UWPD, yes. Amazing. Yes. It's so nice to be able to connect that without cables. and without battery, and have everything just power off the FX6.
Incredible. So there's certainly, we only had so much time in this episode, and there's a lot more to learn. Sam, as we go, anything that we didn't talk about that you think is worth mentioning or people should learn more about?
Sure. Well, we have a great resource that we're working on with our team here at the DMPC that's called SonyCine.com. And we have lots of videos that we're making for the FX6. How to set up your slow motion is one of the latest videos that we just released last week with the launch. And so check out SonyCine.com. It's got a really cool data calculator, so you can figure out how many cards you need based on what formats you're recording, and lots of other resources like the LUTs you can download from there. So Sony Cine, CINE.com.
And we'll put it in the show notes, of course. I'm looking at it right now. My God, I want this FS6. God damn it. There it goes. This one conversation cost me $6,000. So there it is, SonyCine.com. And Jordan, just kind of closing thoughts. I mean, you're out there in the field working with this thing. What should people know? What are your impressions of it? What do you want to leave people with?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is just, again, like if you're looking for a great documentary camera that allows you to just do more with a little less to worry about, this is it. And I think, like, just as through all these features we've discussed, it seems like this is like the beginning of an age maybe of cameras that are new, that kind of marry automation in whatever big scary world exists beyond that, with like whatever you bring as a filmmaker and like your input. And it exists right in the middle ground here in this camera, where like you can be an artist, you can make whatever you want to do with this, and the features will kind of carry some of the hard work for you, and just make it all look way better and more professional.
Well said. And guys, thank you so much for being on the show. It's nice to have that balance. We've got Jordan out there working with this camera as a production, a cinematographer, director, and a production company. And then we've got Sam talking about it on the tech side and from Sony. And I really appreciate it. I like this. I like what we talked about here. I think this was cool. And yes, we didn't get to talk about every single feature, and that's not what this was about. However, you guys watching, if you got questions for either of these guys, leave them in the comments. They will check them. They will respond. And it looks like that SonyCine.com is a great resource as well. So with that, I'll let you guys go. Thank you so much for being on the Go Creative Show.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks for having us, man. Great show. Good luck with everything.